Peter Drucker said it best. The best way to predict the future is to create it. Not analyze it or model it, but create it. That is what strategic thinkers do. They don't react to the market, they shape it. So Jobs didn't know that the iPhone would work. He decided it would. And Musk didn't have proof that Tesla would survive. He moved anyways. Bezos didn't wait for certainty. He built while others debated. Now, while they all had the same access to information and were met with the same uncertain conditions while being exposed to the same feedback of this isn't how it's done, they thought differently. Different thinking, different decisions, different results. But here's the problem. We're not taught how to think strategically. We're not given a class on how to make the right decisions or how to solve problems when you're creating something new, not optimizing something that's already being done. So by default, we borrow. We adopt thinking that others before us had. We default to choosing what feels safe, following a proven path that reduces risks, and we model what's worked from other experts. And that borrowed thinking becomes the system running every decision you make. But you can't create the future while running on borrowed thinking when your actions and decisions are filtered through someone else's mental software that's designed for safety, predictability, and optimization. Innovation doesn't fail loudly. It gets diluted. You start second-guessing decisions that require conviction. You hesitate on moves that don't have precedent, and you optimize what exists instead of building what doesn't. It's not because you're incapable, but because the operating system that's running your decisions was never built to lead. What innovators have and what most founders don't is an internal operating system designed for innovation, a way of thinking that tells you what matters most, what doesn't, and what risks are going to move the future forward. That is what we're breaking down today. It's called the Innovator's Operating System, and it's the internal engine that lets you move first, decide cleaning, and build without waiting for permission. I'm Echeverria, and I help founders and CEOs become category leaders by turning their expertise into a self-selling IP system using the Netflix effect. Now, this week, we're continuing on our Innovation Assets in Action series, where I'm showing you how you can actually deploy your innovation assets within every part of your business. In the last few episodes, we've been talking about how to actually deploy innovation assets within every area of your business. So last week, we talked about the sales indoctrination system and how you actually leverage your innovation assets inside of that system so that you get your buyers to sell themselves. Now, this week, we're going to take it one step further and talk about one area that most people overlook when it comes to how to leverage those innovation assets, and that's inside of your thinking, the way you actually operate. You know, strategic thinking matters, that the founder who sees opportunities first wins, because that's what allows you to make the right call under pressure, stay ahead instead of constantly reacting. And yet, in an attempt to try and develop it, we do all the right things, right? We read the books, we study the frameworks, we learn mental models, and yet that's not building strategic thinking. It's borrowing it, because borrowed thinking has a ceiling. Yeah, it can help you optimize, it can help you avoid some obvious mistakes, but it can't help you lead when there's no playbook, because the system you're running wasn't built for your innovation. It was built for someone else's. That's the difference between strategic thinkers who optimize within the game and the ones who change the game entirely. That's why in the early 2000s, every tech company was making decisions in the same way. They'd sit inside of stuffy corporate offices conducting market research for the 100th time this quarter, run another focus group, have a team of analysts that were watching competitors' every move so that they could do it slightly better. And the thinking was simple. Find out what customers say they want, reduce the risk, and build it. The data was deciding every move. Now, Steve Jobs rejected that concept entirely. He didn't trust focus groups to tell him what to build. He didn't look at what competitors were doing and just try to beat them at their own game. Instead, he ran every decision through one filter. Does this put a dent in the universe? That was what his entire thinking was built off of. So when the board pushed him to license the Mac OS, the safe move that every analyst recommended, he said no. And when the entire industry declared that tablets were dead, he greenlit the iPad. And when music executives said that digital would destroy their business, he created iTunes and restructured the entire industry around it. None of those decisions came from a focus group. They came from his thinking, his internal operating system. Now, Apple didn't just make better products, they made fundamentally different decisions. Ones that looked crazy to everyone else that was running borrowed thinking, but obvious in hindsight. Now, if Jobs had borrowed his thinking from the rest of the market, we'd probably still be carrying around Blackberries and buying CDs at Tower Records. But lucky for us, he didn't do that. He built an operating system around his central belief, and he let that filter every decision he made. Now, the same thing happened with Sarah Blakely. In the late 90s, she got an idea for a product in the fashion industry, a time where the standard playbook was that you raise a few $1 million in funding, you hire people who've been in fashion for 20 years, get into the same retail channels that everyone else was fighting over. Basically, hand your idea to the expert and hope they didn't screw it up. Now, Blakely had none of those things. No fashion experience, no investors, no connections, just a pair of scissors and some pantyhose that she cut the feet off of. Now, she looked like a failure on paper, but she had something that others didn't, a single belief that no one else in the industry was willing to admit, that a product that was designed by people who had never worn them was a broken system. Now, that belief became her operating system. When manufacturers told her that the product couldn't be made, she kept cold calling until someone finally said, "Fine, I'll try." And when Neiman Marcus turned her down the first time, she talked her way into a meeting and pulled the buyer into the bathroom for a live demo. And when lawyers quoted her $3,000 to write a patent, she bought a textbook and figured it out herself. Every decision ran through her filter, not the industry's. Spanx became a $1 billion company. And Blakely became the youngest self made billionaire without raising a dollar, without hiring a single industry expert, and without following any of the proven paths. Now, if she'd borrowed her thinking from the fashion industry, Spanx would have died in a conference room full of people explaining why it couldn't work. She didn't. She built an operating system around a belief that only she held, and that system produced better judgment than decades of industry experience ever could. So while most founders run their thinkings through the same way that everyone else does, the top strategic thinkers built their own operating system, a strategic thinking model that was built around their own central thinking, their vision, their innovation, and then they ran every decision through it. That is how you systematize good judgment. It's how you make the right calls without second guessing, and it's how you solve problems like an innovator, not an operator. Because when your thinking follows the same playbook as everyone else, you end up with the same results as everyone else. So yeah, borrowed thinking may work for the status quo thinker that is built around optimization, but it's going to break for innovation. So true strategic thinking means that you're going to run decisions through your filter, not someone else's. That's why learning mental models from a book doesn't actually make your decision sharper. Those models were built for someone else's context, someone else's business, someone else's vision. And it's why asking your mentor, "What would you do?" still leaves you spinning. Their answers are filtering through their operating system, not yours. So you get their output without their filter. And it's why studying how Jobs or Bezos made decisions doesn't actually make your decisions any easier. You're borrowing on their conclusions without their central belief that drove it. That's why all the strategies, the books, the frameworks, the coaches aren't developing your strategic thinking. They're outsourcing it. So the answer to thinking strategically isn't learning how other people think. It's building the operating system for how you think. One built on what you've created, proven, and own. The operating the system that's going to inform how you see opportunities, how you prioritize, how you decide, even when you can't predict the outcome. This is what's going to separate founders who build category leading businesses from founders that are stuck on competing inside of someone else's game. I call this the innovator's operating system, and it's a three-part process that doesn't tell you what to do. It changes how you think. It's built on your innovation asset, the thing that you've created that makes your perspective undeniable. Now, once you've installed that, it's going to become the filter for every decision, every priority, and every risk you're going to take. So how do you actually build this? Because saying think strategically is meaningless if you don't actually know what that looks like in practice. So let's break down how you create your own operating system, starting with the first piece, which is what I call central force. Now, every innovator operates from a central force. It's that driving principle that's going to lead your entire operating system. It's your worldview, the belief underneath your innovation asset. So while most founders will ask, what is someone else going to do here? Or what's the safest move? Innovators ask, what is my central force demand so that I can create the future that I want? Now that belief becomes the filter. It's going to tell you what matters, what doesn't, what risks are worth taking, and which ones are distractions. Now without that filter, every decision feels heavy. You second guess, you overanalyze, you look for external validation before moving. Now, the reason why this happens is because you're evaluating every decision from scratch. So Jobs had created put a dent in the universe. Now every decision filtered through that, and what to build, what to kill, who to hire ran through that single filter. That's why his move looked really crazy to everyone else, but really obvious in hindsight. He wasn't guessing, he was filtering. Now, Blakely's central force was that she believed that we should be making undergarments by people who actually use them. So when manufacturers said no and retailers rejected her, she didn't ask, what should I do? She asked, what does my central force demand? That is what it looks like when your central force is in action. You have one singular belief that filters all the decisions you're creating. Now, if you're wondering, how the heck do I even start to find that belief? I need you to understand one simple thing, okay? It's that your central belief isn't something you're going to invent. It's something that you uncover. Because if you've built anything meaningful, if you solved real problems and helped clients get results, you already believe something about why your approach works that most people in your industry don't fully see yet. That belief is already there. It's just never been articulated clearly enough to become a filter. So instead of asking, what should my belief be? I want you to ask this. What do I see as true about my industry that most people still misunderstand? Or even simpler, what do I believe is broken about the way that this problem is currently being solved? Because every innovation asset, every category leader, every industry shift starts there. Not with tactics, not with frameworks, but a belief that makes you see the problem differently than everyone else. Now, that belief is going to become the starting point of your operating system. So when we work together with founders, we go a lot deeper on this. We extract it, we refine it, we pressure test it. We make sure that it's strong enough to actually organize decisions around. But it always starts with that same question of, what do you see clearly that others are still missing? Now, once you have that central belief in place, the next problem isn't what to do, it's when to do it. Because innovation doesn't fail from a lack of effort. It fails from decisions being made in the wrong sequence. Now, most founders think that strategy is about choosing the right moves. But the strategy is really about choosing the right moves at the right time. Most founders are trapped in short term thinking. So, whatever feels urgent today, which problem's the loudest, whatever tactic that everyone's talking about this week. And it makes sense. There's always a fire to put out, something that's demanding our attention right now. But when short term thinking runs your decisions, you're ending up busy and not building. So, yes, you're moving, you're just not moving forward. Every week is going to feel like you're starting over because nothing compounds. Think about it this way: a decision that's made too early creates chaos, but that same decision made at the right time creates momentum. This is what I call strategic sequencing. It's the ability to understand which decision unlocks the next one. The long term is going to tell you where you're going. The strategy tells you how you'll get there, and the tactics are just the daily drivers that serve the strategy. You look at decisions differently when you understand this. Think about chess. An amateur looks at the board and asks, what's a good move right now? A grandmaster looks at that board and asks, where do I need to be in 10 moves? What position am I building towards? And then they work backwards from that. Every move in the short term is going to serve the long term position. That is strategic sequencing. We're identifying the decisions that create leverage. Jobs didn't wake up and ask, what product should we launch this quarter? He asked, what is the dent in the universe demand over the next decade? And then he worked backwards to that strategy and then moved to tactics. That's why Apple's moves compounded. Nothing was random. Every short-term decision served a long-term vision. Now, most founders reverse this without realizing it. They try to scale before the foundation is stable. They try to optimize before the core mechanism is proven, and they try to add complexity before simplicity is ever mastered. Now, none of those are bad decisions. They're just out of order. So when decisions are out of order, effort goes up and progress slows down because the next step hasn't actually been unlocked yet. Think of it like a line of dominoes. If you knock over a random domino in the middle, a few pieces might move, but the chain is going to stop really quickly. But if you knock over the first domino, everything after it moves automatically. Strategic sequencing is about finding that first domino, the decision that is going to make the next decision easier, faster, and sometimes unnecessary altogether. Strategic thinkers don't ask, what should I do next? They ask, what's the domino that makes the rest fall? If your positioning isn't clear yet, more content's not going to fix that. So if your offer isn't differentiated yet, more traffic won't fix that. If your thinking isn't clear yet, more tactics won't fix that. So you need to be able to think strategically about what piece is going to line up with the next one. Amplification isn't going to solve foundational problems. It's only going to magnify them. This is why some founders feel like they're working harder every year, but the business never feels like it's getting simpler. They're pushing dominoes that aren't connected. So strategic thinkers understand that something most people is going to miss is that some decisions aren't going to work until another decision has been made first. Sequence matters. Now, if you're listening and wondering, well, how do I know if I'm focusing on the right domino? Here's the simplest way to start seeing it. Ask yourself, am I making this decision to solve a short term problem, or does it serve where I'm actually trying to go? Because most founders are playing checkers, reacting move by move, but strategic thinkers are playing chess. Every move is sequenced towards a position that most people won't see until it's already built. So when we work with founders, this is where we map out the hierarchy. We get really clear on the long-term vision first, then reverse engineer how we develop the strategy, the tactics that actually serve that. So nothing gets wasted. Every move compounds, and you know it's working when you stop feeling scattered, when you stop chasing whatever's urgent and start building towards something that's inevitable. So if component number one is the belief that guides your decisions, and component number two is the sequence that gives those decisions leverage, then component number three is what allows you to move with speed and conviction, even when the outcome isn't predictable. So I want you to think about it this way. Decision velocity is where we actually take that core central belief and understand it and create the strategic sequence. Then something starts happening, right? You start to move faster, not because you're rushing, but because you're no longer waiting for certainty. This is the third part of the innovator's operating system, decision velocity. It's the ability to make clear, committed decisions, even when that outcome isn't guaranteed. Now, most founders think that hesitation is a discipline. They tell themselves that they're being careful, that they need more data, they need more research, more validation. But in reality, what they're often waiting for is permission that the decision will work, permission that someone else has done it first, or permission that the risk has already been removed. Now, innovation never gives you any of that. If the path were proven, it wouldn't be innovation, it would simply be optimization. Now, this is why borrowed thinking slows people who are innovators down, because you're relying on external frameworks, external validation, and every decision requires confirmation. So you have to stop, check, compare, analyze, and by the time you move, the window of opportunity has already shifted. Innovators operate differently. They don't wait for certainty, they move from conviction. So conviction doesn't come from confidence, it's going to come from clarity. Clarity about what you believe, clarity about what actually decisions are going to move things forward. And when those things become clear, your decisions are going to stop feeling heavy. So they become really obvious, not easy, but obvious. So it's kind of like driving somewhere with a clear destination versus driving without one. When you know where you're going, you don't just hesitate at every turn. You don't pull over every 5 minutes to kind of reconsider the route. You adjust as you go, but the direction is really clear. Without that clarity, every intersection is going to feel like a major decision. That's how most founders are going to operate. Every decision feels heavier than it should because there's no internal operating system that's going to guide and direct you, okay? If you want to start strengthening this immediately, here's a useful question to ask yourself. Am I delaying this decision because I lack information or because I lack clarity about what matters most? Those are very different problems. Information rarely creates conviction, clarity does. And when we work with founders, one of the first shifts that we notice isn't just better strategy, it's faster decisions and cleaner decisions. Less second guessing because you're no longer wondering what's happening after the fact. Now, once that operating system is in place, decisions are going to stop feeling like guesses and start feeling like judgment, like you know exactly what to do. So the innovator's operating system has three parts: a central belief that guides those decisions, your strategic sequencing that gives those decisions leverage, and ultimately decision velocity. That's what's going to allow you to move without waiting for permission. Now, when all three of those things are working together, something really powerful happens. Your decisions stop being scattered. Your business stops feeling heavier as it grows because you're no longer relying on borrowed thinking. You're operating from your own. That is the innovator's operating system. It's that internal engine, and it leads how you move forward, how you decide how a business can actually move forward. Now, a business that stands on its own is going to require two engines: the internal engine that creates the clarity and conviction, and the external energy that carries that thinking into the market automatically. So that's exactly what we build inside of the EasyS method. We turn your innovation into a business that's going to attract, convert, and deliver results without constant pushing or persuasion. So this happens in three parts, with the first one being winning the market. Now, your best clients are not looking for another version of what already exists. They're looking for the breakthrough that makes them say, this is exactly what I've been waiting for. But most founders instead are positioning themselves as a better option. So not the only option, which forces you into competition, comparison, and convincing. So the first step inside the EasyS method is actually building what we call your innovation asset. We've kind of alluded to this today. This is where we help you uncover and articulate articulate the gap in the market that only your thinking fills. So you're developing an asset that quite literally changes the way the market thinks. So you're no longer creating louder messaging or prettier branding or tweaking your offer. You're clarifying the innovation behind your work so that buyers see what you do as the only option, the reference point, the standard in the market. When you're able to do this and when we work together with our clients, everything changes. You're no longer chasing attention. You stop competing on price. You have high intent buyers who are coming to you, recognizing your value immediately, happy to pay 5 to 10 times more than what you're charging right now. And you're getting opportunities in the business and in the market because you are quite literally seen as the standard way of thinking. So if you've ever questioned how people become the standard in the market, the one that everyone thinks of when they think of your market, this is how. It's what allows you to raise your prices, attract better clients, become known for something specific instead of blending into a category. Now, that's how you win the market. The second step is realizing that winning attention is just not enough. Your buyers still need to move from interest to action, okay? Now, most sales processes are making this a lot harder than it needs to be. They're creating long nurture cycles, endless content, this back and forth conversation process, all because that system hasn't been built to indoctrinate and mirror how decisions naturally happen. So I want you to think about it this way. People don't decide in fragments, they decide in immersion. Think about how Netflix works. You're not watching one episode, waiting a week to feel invested. You binge, right? And with every episode you binge, that story becomes clearer. The stakes become higher. You become more invested until the point where you realize that you are a diehard fan of that. We apply that same psychology to sales. We call this the bingeable decision system. So it's a structured experience where buyers are moving through your thinking in sequence, installing beliefs step by step until working with you feels like the obvious next move. We use a bingeable video or audio series in order to do this, and it's built specifically around your innovation asset. So there's no more chasing, no more convincing, no more dragging. You have people coming into your world actually having sold themselves, ready to pay you because they know that this is the solution they've been looking for and that your innovative worldview was what the missing piece was. Now, once you have that in place, then becomes the part that most people overlook, delivery, because marketing that attracts clients is only as powerful as the delivery that's going to create transformation. Sustainable businesses aren't built on one-time wins, they're built on repeatable results. So the third part is what we call the happy client machine. It's where your methodology becomes systemized into a delivery process that produces consistent outcomes. So without being fully dependent upon you, you're able to create opportunities to serve clients at scale and create the additional revenue streams like licensing, having workshops, having a consulting firm, having ways to be able to take your work beyond what you're doing so it becomes a legacy. This is where your reputation can compound instead of resetting every month and how businesses are able to scale without burning out the founder. So when you zoom out, the EasyS method does something really simple but really powerful. It turns your innovation into a complete ecosystem. So your innovation asset wins the market, your bingeable decision system converts the market, your happy client machine compounds the market. And when this is paired with the Innovators operating system that we talked about here today, you're not just running a business, you're leading a category. So if this episode resonated with you and you know that you're ready to stop relying on borrowed thinking and start building a business that runs on your own, the next step is simple: to book a growth optimization call. This call will be done with me. We'll sit down, we'll look at what your current business model looks like. We'll identify where your innovation assets can actually be built and how we can actually turn that into a bingeable system that gets your leads to sell themselves. The best way to do this is head on over to apply for this call at easyesleads.com/call to book your call right now. Now, if you want to go a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more about how we developed the EasyYes method and leverage the Netflix effect to turn your expertise into a self-selling system, you can watch our on-demand series at thenetflixeffect.com. Now, as always, if this episode helped you think differently, I would love and appreciate if you could take just 1 second to share, rate, and subscribe so that we can help other founders who are building something different, not just something bigger. Because the businesses that shape industries aren't the ones who are following the playbook. They're the ones who are writing their own. So until next time, here's to keeping it real.